Alright, so I'm here over at the east side of Gardens by the Bay in Singapore, and this is actually my absolute favorite location to shoot the cityscape of Singapore. Of course, what you can see in the background, although I understand it's a bit bright, it's Gardens by the Bay and the two flower domes. Marina Bay Sands is right behind me, and of course downtown Singapore, as well as the Singapore Flyer. And this location is the best in my opinion, simply because it's the most accessible, yet also the most satisfying vantage point you can ever find in Singapore, and perhaps even in Asia. This view basically is the bay with the skyline, and that's it. I mean, you can shoot with the wide angle lens and you will get everything you want. The only thing you have to work on is perhaps getting here, because if you are taking public transportation, it's about 2 kilometers. The entrance is about 2 kilometers away from the nearest train station. You can take a bus to get a bit closer, but even then you're gonna have to walk at least, I think, about a kilometer or maybe even two, just to get to the right vantage point. Now, the right vantage point or the right spot that you have to find is simply the spot wherein you are facing the best angle of the cityscape, because if not, then perhaps you're gonna be looking at the frontal view of the Singapore Flyer if you didn't go all the way here, if you didn't walk a kilometer, and it wouldn't be as nice to look at as a Ferris wheel. And another factor is that the buildings are also going to be overlapping each other, so you do kind of have to do a bit of legwork, but it is going to be worth it. A few hundred steps is going to give you the proper angle that will give you a good view of the cityscape. Now, as I said, it's very straightforward. You can shoot it with a wide angle lens or even a standard zoom. I prefer going here during the sunrise. This is my second time here. Third if you count the terrible weather yesterday where I didn't even bring out my camera. I just enjoyed the view. And so this is a really good spot for shooting Singapore during the sunrise. And that's what I came here to do. However, there was still quite a bit of a gloomy weather. The sun only came out a few minutes ago while I was shooting. But if you had perfect weather, you would have really good reflections in the water as well. Now, one valuable feedback I have gotten from some filter users or landscape photographers in general about using filters is that they get quite intimidated by shooting with heavier ND filters. And by that, I mean filters that are about 12 stops, 13, 14, 15, 16. It can be quite intimidating because if you are doing it in a hit or miss or a trial and error method, it's going to take a while for you to get the right exposure. One way is to do the rule of the ISO 6400, which is to simulate your exposure, get the right exposure using ISO 6400, and the shutter speed that you get to be able to get a balanced exposure, you convert into minutes. So if you get, for example, 1 second for a balanced exposure in ISO 6400, then in ISO 100, you can use that as 1 minute. But even then, if the light is changing, that is still going to be quite a hit or miss game. No matter what kind or brand or format of filters you use, you should always pay attention to what is written on the filter, because that will actually give you the best idea on how long your exposures will be. This particular filter is an ND8 filter, which is 3 stops. 1 stop of light is basically cutting the amount of light in half, and 3 stops is doing it 3 times, meaning that the resulting amount of light is 1/8 of the original. And that's why the number here, which is ND8 or NDX8, is actually relevant. All you have to do is get the shutter speed on your base exposure and multiply it by 8 to get the same amount of luminosity or brightness while being able to do long exposures. Knowing this will allow you to lessen the time of trial and error or guessing whenever you're shooting and trying to do longer exposures. In the same way, this drop-in filter from HNY is an ND65000, which is a 16-stop ND filter, meaning that this actually reduces the amount of light by half 16 times. The resulting amount of light is actually 1 over 65,536 of the original amount of light. This number is actually a rounded down figure, but you can also use that to estimate the resulting exposure time for your long exposure images. You can simply multiply your base shutter speed or the shutter speed that you need when you have no filters on by 65,000. The resulting number will basically be a good estimate of the exposure that you need when you are using this 16-stop filter. Another thing you can do is to simply use a calculator, or specifically an ND filter calculator. Now, of course, what I use is the one of Myops because it is integrated into my camera trigger. The benefit of that is that I only have to input my base exposure, actually just the base shutter speed, and how many stops of a filter I am using. So that means if I'm using a 15-stop ND filter, I put 15 stops and I put whatever base shutter speed I had without that filter. And it's going to compute for me, and when it has the result, which is kind of instantaneous, you just press the button down below. Now in this situation, the reason why I would use such a heavy ND filter is because I want the most refined water surface. I was earlier shooting with a 10 stop and it just wasn't cutting it out for me. I had to do longer exposures. I could still get a lot of ripples in the water. At the same time, the clouds are very slow moving and I kind of want to just erase them, or at the very least blur them out with motion. So that's why I used an ND65000. And of course, today I'm shooting with the RevoRing Swift filter holder with the HNY K series filters. And what I have is a soft GND and, as I said, the ND65000. So following what I just said, all you have to do is get your base exposure just to get the right shutter speed without the filter, and when you have that, you input that into the app that you're using. Do check out Myops. You'll be given a button to start the exposure, and once you're done, you just press it and it starts the exposure for you. And there we go. I will post a link of a cheat sheet that I created if you don't have the Myops trigger or the Myops app or any other calculator. I did come up with a conversion table of what you have to do, a conversion factor or multiplication factor that you need to be able to get the right exposure, depending still on the base exposure that you have gotten for that situation. Remember that the use of filters and all the settings depend on the light environment that you have as you were shooting. And of course, if you have any questions, do leave them down below in the comment section and I will try my best to answer what you have about shooting with ND filters, or you can ask questions about filters in general and I will do my best to help you. And of course, if you're new to the channel, my name is Nicco Valenzuela. I am a landscape and architectural photographer, and this channel talks about landscape photography, architectural photography, gear reviews, and tutorials as well. So if you're into that, then you might want to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell as well. In any case, thank you for watching.